We really struggled the last time we ran the car because of fuel delivery issues. We were overwhelming the carburetor and pumping fuel out of the bowl directly down into the carburetor when we would go into the turn. We've got to deal with it. Got a lot of feedback in the last 24 hours and the consensus is in. This type of regulator that has a bypass orifice in it is not correct to use with a cam-driven fuel pump like what we've got. So we can either change it and put a new one on, or we can modify this one. Gotten some good feedback on how to do that. Let's get to it. All right, so what we've got set up here is a bypass fuel delivery system. Here's the way this works, and this is the short story. We've got a delivery line that's a 10 AN, that's a half-inch delivery line. It's coming into a ProCam 11 PSI pump down here on the block. And that line's coming back up and around right here, and it's tapped into the carburetor right here, okay? And then turn around and it tees right here and it goes into the regulator. Well, the regulator has got a baffle in it with a spring, and that spring is what is adjustable to control pressure. And you adjust the spring to whatever pressure that above that baffle gets pushed back, and then fuel will go through the line and return back to the tank. Now, by adjusting that spring right here on that, it got an Allen bolt right there that adjusts the tension on that spring. By doing that, you can control how much head pressure is in this line to feed your carburetor between the pump and the carburetor itself. So right in this little piece of line right here, we can adjust this spring right here, and that controls how much pressure is right there. But I've got a problem. It hasn't been acting right from the get-go, and I have not been able to adjust my fuel pressure correctly. My fuel pressure would always read just 2 or 3 pounds when I would tap the gauge in here. It would be real low on my pressure, but yet it had plenty of fuel and it was running plenty of fuel down the straightaway, and then I've been running into problems with having too much fuel getting delivered. Well, I did a little bit of research, and I've actually got the wrong regulator on it. This regulator has got the baffle and the spring, but it has a hole that is open where fuel's always going through it. So fuel, a certain amount of fuel is always dumping through it all the time, and then above a certain point, pressure would overcome it and push the spring back. That type regulator is made for a belt drive pump where the fuel always has to be able to go somewhere. And that's not what a cam drive pump. A cam drive pump, the fuel can literally sit and not have to flow. All right, and so completely different type of regulator system between the two. And I didn't understand this, and I've had a few people that have explained it to me after our last video. And if you watch that video, I was really struggling at a race, and we were dumping way too much fuel into the carburetor and struggling to be able to get our fuel pressure set. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this regulator off, and worst case scenario, I've got to replace it anyway. And I've gotten some information that the only difference is one has got the hole in the middle of the baffle and one doesn't. And if you plug the hole, you've literally just turned it into the other one. So there's no reason for us to not try it. Let's take it off and let's do that. And give us a chance too. We can look at how these are made. If you've never looked at how one's made inside, we'll just do it together, y'all. Let's see if we can't get this thing to start acting right before, well, as a matter of fact, before I take that off. Let me go ahead and break these loose. But yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll get this thing off here, and we'll put it on the bench and we'll take it apart, y'all. There we go. Put a rag up underneath, catch some of that gas. But yeah, I've got, like I said, I've got half-inch line, that's the 10 AN running to it, and then that's number 8 there coming back on the return, sit you right over there. All right, and this is just a little homemade bracket that just keeps everything from shaking, because these little aluminum lines they're pretty fragile, so I wouldn't want all the weight of this stuff just shaking around on the engine. I think it would probably break the line, so that's the reason I got this all bolted up here. I don't know if you can buy this piece already made. I'm sure you can, but I couldn't see exactly what I needed, so I just made one. All right. And unscrew that. Try to go the right way. All right, let's get over here on the bench and take a look at it. So we got a cap here. Let's get this cracked open. hopefully parts won't go flying in a million pieces. Hold my finger over it for this last one in case it's got pressure on it. Well, a little bit of pressure, not much. Okay, so it's coming apart. There's that spring we was talking about. So let's see. Okay, so we got a spring, and this bolt right here, that's that adjuster nut. So as I screw that down, that's pushing that spring harder, okay? And then, let's look and see what we got on the other side. And you'll see, this was the inflow right here, so fuel was coming in here, and look, we've got a baffle right here. The spring was sitting against this, and see it's cone. So these holes around here, when this is pushed all the way up, none of these holes around the edges are getting fuel. But look, there's a pill in the middle of it like a jet. Okay, so that jet's open all the time. That's for a belt drive pump. And so, there you go, got a hole in the middle of it. And what had been pointed out to me was, well, Jason, before you just go and just buy a whole nother regulator, that's a good regulator, well made and everything, just check and see if you can't tap and plug your bypass hole in the middle, because then that'll make it where that you'll get a pressure reading and everything, and it'll run on a pulse type fuel pump for a cam. Be a lot easier for you to set up. So try that, because there'll be no difference. And I was like, thank you very much. That was a great tip, good advice. So it looks like that jet is just screwed in right there, and it is. And these are I bet you can, I bet like if you're running a late model or some system with a belt drive pump, my assumption is going to be that you can change the size of this jet, and that's controlling your low pressure side, and then you use the screw to control the high pressure, is my assumption on how this works. And I further assume, I'm going out on a limb here, y'all, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but that if I really knew what I was doing, and I had these in multiple different sizes, I probably could change this jet and get the adjustment set for this to work for this carburetor, if I really knew what I was doing. And I don't have any technical support to know what direction to go. So we've got some good information to plug it, so we're going to plug it. So let's see if we can find a screw that will thread up in there, and we'll put a little Teflon tape and we'll seal that bad boy up. Alright, I think I got something here that'll work. Of course, I mean, if it's wrong and I'm going to have to replace it anyway, I don't really mind, you know, even if I damage this, you know, it had to go regardless, so I'm not feeling too bad about that. I wish it worked. I wish I had. I'm not as knowledgeable on the bypass fuel systems. I've never run a bypass fuel system. I've been told several times it is much better to run a bypass fuel system, especially on E85, and the feedback that I got that was telling me why it was so important was because that it's keeping your fuel from getting really heated sitting there in the lines in the engine bay. Its fuel's always going to be moving back. Let me get a pair of pliers here. Make sure I want to make sure I don't mar this brass up. So I'll do like this right here. But you want to make sure that you're always moving fuel through the system back to the tank. That has a cooling effect. So you're delivering cool fuel into, there we go. Get that good and tight. And then I'm going to cut it off. That is definitely not coming out of there. So now I'm just going to cut it off. Just making sure I don't booger up that cone that it sits on. Looks good to me, y'all. So we got a couple O-rings here we want to make sure are sitting in their grooves where they're supposed to. Get in there. And I got an end. I want that end to stay up, and drop that right there. And Make sure that's turned and lined up right there. And then that, oh, can't do it like that. Drop that in there. Well, get this all in the right order. Drop that in there. Then, O-ring right, drop that there. Okay, yep. And then, O-rings right, no debris. Looks good. Spring looks good. That goes right there on the back of that. Didn't have a language on it or anything. Put that there. Put the bolt in here. And then I should be able to turn it until that lines up. Yep, that lined up. So the way this was working with a hole in the center of it like that, with me just sitting here running it in the shop, you know, it's like I had no fuel pressure. I had 2 or 3 pounds of fuel pressure or something on that pump. And, you know, it's like, well, how am I supposed to set, you know, the guy that supplied all this stuff, you know, he was like, you know, 7.5 to, you know, 8.5 pounds of fuel pressure. And it's like, well, how am I supposed to set that? Because, you know, it's bypassing all the time. So you're not actually seeing your head pressure that you would have, you know, under throttle at high RPM. And so that means that you would have to run a gauge in the dash. But not only would you have to run a gauge in the dash, but it's not just any time. It's like you need to see what's on the gauge, like as you're pulling down the straightaway, which means you got to run, you know, either telemetry, which, you know, that's most classes don't let you run telemetry, but, you know, we all do kind of because, you know, we run GoPros that look at our gauges in the dash. If you're not running a GoPro on the gauges in your dash, folks, tracks allow you to do that, and that ain't nothing but telemetry. So that's kind of where I'm like, you know, this is just not right. And I wasn't sure, and I've been struggling with it and everything, but then after having that frustrating run the other night up at TNR Hohenwald, that was in the last video if you hadn't saw that. But, you know, after that frustrating run, I was asking for some help, and I had several of y'all that, you know, jumped out here and gave me some feedback and said, yes, that's not right, Jason. You should be running the one without the orifice. Really appreciate that, because I was kind of like, you know, am I missing something? You know, what's going on here? I'm going to save that. But, you know, am I missing something? Something going on here that I'm not understanding? And I've had several of y'all say, no, you're not crazy. You really shouldn't be running that one. You should be running one that doesn't have the hole in the middle. Okay, so, doesn't have a hole in the middle. Hey! The other thing, too, is I already know. Let's just back this. My assumption, ooh. Hey, you're tight. That's that at the track aggravated tightening right there going on. Oh, got it. Anyway, back his thing up some. All right, so that's all the way back. Right there. We'll see where that's at on pressure. Okay, so we're backed all the way out here, and we're ready to go back on the car. But yeah, so we're going to put it back on. Let's fire it up. Let's see if we can set the pressure on it with a gauge this time. All right. Slide you right in here like this. There we go. Good. Get you tight. That's good. And put you back on here. This thing goes together easy after I got it all figured out. There we go. Don't go crazy tightening them up, y'all. All right. So I had left the fuel gauge off of it and put a plug in it. And I've had other systems where that when I had a fuel gauge, I would just have a tap port where I could drop it in, and you know, you quit fooling with it, and then you just put a plug in there, and I didn't have to worry about it. But I don't guess there's anything wrong with leaving the gauge in it. I just always felt like that was one more place that could leak fuel, and so, you know, I'd plug it off. But I may have to leave it on. I may have to run a system. I may have to run something in the dash. If I run one in the dash, I'm either going to run an isolator, or I'm going to run, you know, an electronic one. I am not going to put fuel into the driver's compartment with me. I've just always felt like that was a safety issue. You just shouldn't do that. You shouldn't put fuel in a line, you know, in the driver's compartment with you. It just seems like that would be just extra danger that you should avoid. There's no reason to put yourself at risk like that. is the way I felt about it. There we go. That's close enough. All right, close enough. And let's see. Don't need that there. I have to move that light because it's just gonna get shook off. Yep. All right, we're gonna crank this thing up and see if we can adjust it. I'm gonna have to move y'all. Come on, Bessie. Here, and it looked like to me that it would only come up to about 6 pounds, a little bit past 6 pounds of fuel pressure is all that gauge would show. So just to make sure we're not missing anything, I'm going to drop another fuel gauge on that's off of my diagnostic fuel gauge. I'm going to drop it on right quick, and we'll just make a comparison and make sure it's not that gauge as well. Throwing us a little something else, another gremlin in the game there. I got a gauge here that I use on a line, and I know, or at least I believe, I haven't used it in a couple of years, but this is an odometer fuel pressure gauge, and I've used it before. So let's throw it on right quick. Oh, I gotta have some Teflon tape. I'll tell y'all something. That daggone E85, if you got a cut on the finger, woo, that stuff will tear you up. I am telling you, it will light you on fire. It has got my attention, that's for sure. Okay. All right, so we pulled this little glycerin filled gauge right here off, and it was only showing 6 pounds. Got a little above 6, maybe to 6.5 was the most when I turned the regulator all the way in. And I know that's an 11-pound Pro-Cam pump, and those are pretty good fuel pumps. Pretty trustworthy. Matter of fact, I've had this one apart and checked the internals on it, and it's just spot on. So I am double checking that. So I've got, this is an odometer here, fuel pressure gauge, and I have used this before. I know this thing is accurate, it works. I hadn't used it in a couple of years, but it's been in the box. There's no reason for it to not be working now. So, I'll lay that up here. I'll show y'all when I look at it. Lay this up here. I'm going to fire this car back up. We're going to compare gauges because we don't want to miss anything. Yeah. telling me something for sure. So I'm backed way out on that regulator from where I was. Now that's making a little bit of sense to me, because I think the bypass was fooling me. So it was bypassing through the middle, and so I wasn't getting a good gauge reading. And then I had it screwed in a lot further, and so now that's kind of making sense to me. Like at high RPM down the straightaway, you know, that pump's putting out, that pump's putting out like 130 gallons an hour or something. Like, it puts out a ton of fuel. And so at that point, I was getting that head pressure probably for where that screw was screwed all the way in. And that's probably what was screwing me up. That's probably what was screwing me up. Which tells me that if I had a gauge in the dash and I was watching the pressure at high RPM, I probably could have adjusted it out and made it work. You know, with an orifice in the middle bleeding through like that. I just would have had to been real time looking at the pressure at top RPMs, not like this, setting it, you know, just idling and idled up and stuff. But I feel a whole lot better about what I'm seeing now. And be careful on these gauges. Use good stuff. Like I said, that junk there. You know, I buy these industrial, like McMaster Car, you know, glycerin filled. I think that's where I got this from, was like McMaster Car or something. I don't even think this was Amazon. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. But you know, yeah, it's junk. So be careful on that stuff, because that one right there would have kept me chasing my tail even further. Because I know this one's right. And that makes sense too, because 9 pounds, it's 11-pound pump, so it's probably just right in there. You know, it was feeding fuel to the carburetor, and, you know, that was sitting there showing me that I was just a little past 9 pounds idling on that pump right there. So that makes a lot more sense. I'm like, oh yeah, that number makes sense now with me just having that screw screwed all the way in, holding that regulator tight. Feel better about it. Hey, quick shout out. I've got an all-in sponsor, Jeremy Allen. I've talked to Jeremy, I think, once or twice. About some setup work and stuff, where I've been trying to help him with his car as well on the parts that I know about. And Jeremy jumped in as an all-in sponsor for us at $25 a month to help us to be able to go race. Jeremy, I really appreciate that. Thank you. Always, there's a link up in the corner if you want to look to see how to join our team. Little as $5 a month. That's how we're able to do this. And I'm fixing to pull that. I'm going to plug that hole back. I'm not going to run a gauge. It's set now, so I'm going to plug that hole. And then in the next video, I'm dropping this transmission and putting these oil restrictors in. I want to show that while I got the transmission out. I'm going to put a rebuild kit in this Falcon transmission. That's 2 different videos, y'all. We got to get them done this week, because we're going to take this car right back to the track next weekend. All right, see you next time.